I heard his car pull into the driveway at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I already knew something was wrong. Not because of the time, not because of anything I could name, but because of the way the engine cut off too quickly. Like he'd made a decision before he even walked through the door. I was standing at the kitchen counter cutting bell peppers for dinner. We'd been married for 9 years. I was 31 years old, and I still set the table for two every night, even on the nights he texted to say he'd be late. That's the kind of woman I was then, the kind who kept the candle burning even when the room already smelled like smoke. He came in through the garage door. He didn't say hi. He set his laptop back on the chair, not the hook. Never the hook anymore. And he opened the refrigerator and stood there for a long moment, not taking anything out. "I'm making stir-fry," I said. "I'm not hungry." I kept cutting. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter on the opposite side of the kitchen, and looked at me the way you look at something you're trying to figure out how to move. Like furniture. Like an inconvenience you haven't solved yet. "I need to tell you something," he said. I put the knife down. "Here's what I want you to understand before I tell you," what he said. "My husband was not a bad man in the way people imagine bad men. He didn't yell. He didn't disappear for weekends. He came home most nights, paid the mortgage on time, remembered my parents' anniversary. He was the kind of person who held the elevator for strangers and tipped 20% at every meal. The people at his office loved him. My mother adored him. But for 2 years, maybe 3, if I'm being honest with myself, he had been slowly, quietly convincing me that the way I experienced our marriage was wrong, that I was too sensitive, too needy, that I asked for too much just by asking for anything at all. He never said it directly. He said it in sighs, in the way he'd glance at his phone while I was mid-sentence, in the way he'd say, "You always do this," without ever explaining what this was. I had started apologizing for things I hadn't done wrong. That's how I knew something had shifted, not in him, but in me, in what I was willing to accept as normal. He set his glass down and said, "I've been spending time with someone from work. I don't want to lie to you about what it is. It's more than it should be." The bell pepper was still on the cutting board. I remember thinking absurdly that I should finish cutting it. "Her name is," he started. "Don't," I said. "I don't want her name." He nodded. He actually looked relieved. Like I'd done him a favor. "How long?" I asked. 4 months. My youngest sister's baby was 4 months old. I had been folding onesies at a baby shower while my husband was with someone else. I had driven him to the airport 3 times in 4 months and kissed him goodbye at departures and said, "Text me when you land." And he had. He always texted when he landed. "I think," he said slowly, like he was reading from something he'd rehearsed, "that we've grown apart. I think we want different things now. I think the life we built together. I don't know if it still fits who I am." "Who you are," I repeated. "I'm not happy, Vivian." He said it like it was my fault. Like happiness was something I owed him and had been withholding. I looked at him across our kitchen. The kitchen we'd spent $11,000 renovating 2 summers ago. The kitchen where I'd learned to make his mother's pot roast. Where I'd cried when I miscarried at 11 weeks and he'd held me on the floor against the cabinets. And I thought, he really believes this. He believes this is a reasonable thing to say to me. "You're not happy," I said. "I haven't been for a while. And you spent 4 months being unhappy with her instead of telling me." He opened his mouth. "Don't," I said again. I picked up the knife. I finished cutting the bell pepper. I heard him walk down the hallway, heard the bedroom door close softly. Always so softly. He was a man who prided himself on never slamming doors. And I stood there and finished making dinner for 2, and then I sat down at the table and ate alone. I didn't cry that night. I want to tell you that because I think people expect a particular kind of collapse, the falling apart, the begging, the screaming. I didn't do any of that. I sat at the table with my stir fry and a glass of water, and I thought about the very first thing he ever said to me, which was a joke about parallel parking at a party in Bucktown. And I thought about who I had been at 22 years old, and I thought about who I was now. And I tried to figure out if the distance between those two women was my fault or just the natural consequence of spending 9 years making yourself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I came to no conclusion that night. But I did do one thing. After dinner, I washed the dishes, dried them, put them away. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and I opened a new browser tab. I typed the name of a divorce attorney my coworker had mentioned once offhand after her own marriage ended. I didn't call. I didn't email. I just found the website and I read every word on it, and then I saved it to my bookmarks under a folder I labeled recipes. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do. But I knew I was going to do something, and I knew it was going to be mine. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life, and I have had some strange weeks. My husband, I still called him that in my head because I didn't know what else to call him, stayed in the house. This was his idea, and I agreed to it because I was not ready to be alone in the way that would come after he left, and because I needed time, and because something in me, some cold and quiet part of me that had woken up at the kitchen counter, understood that the more I knew before I made any move, the better off I would be. We moved around each other like planets in different orbits. Polite, distant, he cooked his own meals most nights. I cooked mine. He stopped coming to bed before midnight. I stopped leaving the bedside lamp on. I made an appointment with the attorney. Her name was Donna, and she had an office in Lincoln Park with good natural light and a very calm way of explaining extremely devastating things. I told her everything in approximately 40 minutes. She took notes. She asked questions about our finances, our property, our accounts. Here's what I learned in that room. My husband and I had a joint checking account that we both contributed to, a mortgage on our house in Wicker Park, 2 cars both paid off, and a joint investment account that had grown quietly and steadily for 7 years without either of us paying much attention to it. I also had, separately, a Roth IRA I had opened in my own name at 25 because my dad always said to, and a savings account he didn't know about, not because I was hiding anything, but because it was left over from before we combined finances and I'd just never moved the money. Donna told me to stop moving money. She told me to document everything. She told me to make copies of every financial document in the house and store them somewhere that wasn't the house. I went home and I did exactly that. Over the next 10 days, while my husband was at work, and sometimes I now understood, not at work, I photographed every document in our filing cabinet. Tax returns, investment statements, the mortgage, his pay stubs, which he left in a folder on his desk as he always had, because he had never thought to hide anything from me, because he had never imagined I would look. I opened my own checking account at a different bank. I didn't move any shared money. I just opened a door. And then I called my sister. My sister Ingrid is 3 years younger than me and has, in my opinion, always been the smarter one. She is a project manager for a tech company in Austin, and she approaches personal crises the way she approaches deadlines, with a spreadsheet and a timeline and absolutely zero tolerance for wasted motion. I told her everything on a Thursday night while I was parked in the lot behind a CVS so my husband wouldn't hear. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Okay, so what do you need from me?" Not "I'm so sorry." Not "I always had a bad feeling about him." Just, "What do you need?" That's my sister. I told her what I needed. She wrote it down. What I haven't told you yet, what I maybe should have told you first, is who I used to be before I married him. I was a graphic designer at a mid-sized agency in Chicago. I was good at it. I made a real salary, had my own clients, had been promoted twice before I was 28. I liked my work. It felt like mine. When my husband got an opportunity to transfer to the company's headquarters, which would mean a significant raise and a title change and everything he had been working toward, we talked about it for 3 weeks. We made lists. We weighed options. And ultimately, because I loved him and because I believed in us, I left my agency job and went freelance so that we could make the move, work without him having to negotiate a delayed start date. Freelancing sounded fine in theory. In practice, it meant I lost my biggest clients in the transition, spent 8 months rebuilding a portfolio, charged less than I should have because I was scared, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, started taking on less and less work because the house needed managing and he was traveling so much, and it was just easier if I was the one who stayed flexible. Flexible. That's the word I used. For years I called it being flexible. By the time he told me he wasn't happy, I was working maybe 15 hours a week, charging rates I hadn't raised in 3 years, and quietly dreading the version of my career I'd let myself become. He knew this. He watched it happen. He never said you're shrinking because that would have required him to notice that he was the reason. But here is the thing about being shrunk slowly, over years, by someone who smiles at you while they do it. At some point the shrinking stops, and what's left is a version of you that is smaller than before, yes, but also denser, more concentrated, and very, very aware of exactly what was taken. I started emailing clients the week after my appointment with Donna. I reached out to 3 people I'd worked with before the move, 2 of whom responded within 48 hours. I updated my portfolio website, which I hadn't touched in 2 years. I set my rates where they should have been 3 years ago. And when a new inquiry came in and the client pushed back on the number, I said, "That's my rate," and did not apologize. And she said, "Okay." I did not tell my husband any of this. He was, during this period, cycling through what I can only describe as the stages of a man who expects his wife to make things easier for him. He alternated between being apologetic, making coffee in the mornings, asking if I wanted to talk, and being subtly resentful, as though my refusal to immediately dissolve our marriage was an inconvenience he hadn't budgeted for. One evening he came home and said, "I think I should stay at Kyle's place for a while. Give us both some space." Kyle was his college roommate. He lived in Evanston. "Okay," I said. He waited. I think he expected more, a protest maybe. A question about whether this was really happening. Something he could push against. "That's it," he said. "You want space. Kyle's place gives you space. It makes sense." He left on a Saturday with 2 bags and his guitar, which he hadn't played in 4 years but apparently felt was symbolic to take. I watched the car back out of the driveway from the kitchen window. I didn't move the curtain, I just watched. When he turned the corner and disappeared, I sat down on the kitchen floor. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that again, because I think people assume there must have been crying, and I'm just not saying. There wasn't. What there was, sitting on that cold kitchen floor, was a feeling I couldn't name for a few minutes. And then I could. It was the specific quiet of a room after something loud has been in it for a very long time. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes. Then I got up, made tea, and called Donna. The next 6 months were the hardest and most clarifying of my life, and I've chosen to remember them that way on purpose. Divorce in Illinois, Donna explained, is no fault. Neither party has to prove wrongdoing. What matters is the equitable distribution of marital assets, and equitable does not always mean equal. It means fair, given the circumstances. Given, for example, the career a spouse restructured around a partner's opportunity. Given the years of reduced income, given the earning potential it had been allowed to diminish. I did not know any of this before I walked into Donna's office. I am telling you this because I think a lot of women don't know it, and it matters. The process was not fast, and it was not painless. My husband hired his own attorney, a man named whoever he was, and for a while the conversations through lawyers were careful and cold and expensive. He contested the valuation of certain assets. His attorney sent letters that were technically reasonable and emotionally designed to exhaust me. But I had Donna, and I had Ingrid in her spreadsheet. And I had my own checking account, my own client list, my own work. And I had one more thing, which I hadn't planned on but which turned out to be important. 3 months after he moved out, I got a message from his assistant, a woman named Priya who had worked with him for 2 years and who I had met at company events and always liked. She said she hoped I was okay. She said she thought I should know that the person he had been involved with was no longer with the company. She said she wasn't sure why she was telling me, except that she thought someone should. I thanked her and didn't ask for more details, but I thought about it. I thought about what it means to upend your life for something that doesn't last. To convince yourself that what you have is too small and what's out there is bigger. When really you've just stopped being able to see what's in front of you. My husband had looked at our life and seen a ceiling. I had been in the same life and not seen a ceiling at all, just a series of doors I'd stopped opening because it was easier not to. The difference between us, I realized, was not that he wanted more and I didn't. It was that he wanted more and decided it was someone else's job to give it to him. The house sold in April. This was complicated. Donna was right that we couldn't sell without both parties agreeing. And in the end, we did agree, because the alternative was a longer legal process that neither of us could emotionally or financially afford. We sold to a young couple who walked through it on a Sunday afternoon and made an offer that evening. They were, as far as I could tell, happy. I hoped the kitchen would be good to them. I moved into an apartment in Logan Square with tall ceilings and good light and a second bedroom that I turned into a studio. It was smaller than the house by a significant amount. It was entirely mine. I want to tell you about the first morning in that apartment, because I think it's the part of this story that I go back to most. I woke up at 6:45 without an alarm. The room was quiet. That particular city morning quiet that is not actually silence but has a texture to it. A hum of traffic and birds and other people's lives continuing outside the window. I lay there for a while without looking at my phone, which was a thing I had not done in years. Then I got up and made coffee and took it to the window and stood there looking at the street below, which was just a street, ordinary and unheroic, and I thought, this is mine. All of it, this moment, this quiet, this view. Mine. I don't know how to describe what that felt like without it sounding like the end of a movie. I'll just say that it felt true in a way that very few things had felt true in a very long time. He called me in May. I almost didn't answer. I stared at the name on the screen for long enough that it stopped ringing, and then I called back because I had decided, somewhere in the previous months, that I was not going to be the kind of person who avoids hard things anymore. That ship had sailed. He sounded different. Quieter. Like the air had gone out of something. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. He said he wasn't sure he'd handled any of it the right way. He said he missed, and here he paused for a long time. He said he missed having someone who knew him. I let the silence sit. I think I made a mistake, he said. And here is the thing. Here is the actual thing, I believed him. I don't think he was lying in that moment about missing me or about regretting what he'd done. I think he meant every word, but I had spent 9 years believing that the feelings of the moment were the whole story. I had organized my life around the feelings of his moments, his restlessness, his dissatisfaction, his sudden warmth, his slow withdrawals. And what I had learned, in the apartment in Logan Square with the morning light and the coffee I made exactly the way I liked it, was that a feeling is not a plan. A feeling is not a promise. And regret, however genuine, is not the same as change. I know you did, I said. Do you think, he started. No, I said. Gently. Clearly. Like I knew exactly what I was saying because I did. I don't think so. He was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? He asked. And I thought about the question. I thought about my studio, about the client I'd just signed, about the Saturday morning I'd spent at the farmer's market on Milwaukee Avenue, buying flowers I didn't need, just because I wanted them, about the version of myself that had stood at that kitchen counter cutting bell peppers and swallowing things she should have said years ago. Yeah, I said. I actually am. We said goodbye without drama. When I hung up, I set the phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee. Outside, the street was doing what streets do. A kid on a bike. Someone walking a dog with 3 legs unbothered. The light was coming through the window the way it does in late May in Chicago, long and warm and not quite ready to leave. I had a client call in an hour. I had work I was proud of. I had a life that was, for the first time in a long time, the actual shape of me, not trimmed to fit someone else's idea of what I should occupy. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. I've thought a lot about what actually went wrong in my marriage. Not the affair. That was a symptom. not the disease. What went wrong started years earlier, quietly, in the small daily choices about what to say and what to swallow. Every time I apologized for something I hadn't done wrong, I taught him that I would. Every time I made myself smaller so he could feel bigger, I confirmed that the arrangement was acceptable. I don't say this to blame myself. I say it because understanding it was the only way I could make sure I'd never do it again. There's something I've come to believe, not from any book or sermon, but just from living through it. The way you allow yourself to be treated is a message you send without speaking. My husband didn't wake up one day and decide I wasn't worth respecting. It happened over years, one small concession at a time, until the version of me he knew was a woman who kept dinner warm for a man who'd stopped coming home on time, who renovated a kitchen for a marriage that had already started emptying out. I built a life around his happiness and forgot to tend to my own. That is not noble. That is just slow erasure. What changed everything for me wasn't the anger, though there was anger, real and legitimate. It was the clarity. The moment he said I'm not happy and looked at me like it was my fault, something in me went very still and very clear. I realized I had been unhappy too for a long time, and I had been calling it something else. Flexibility, patience, love. Sometimes love is those things. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a prettier name. Ingrid asked me what I needed, and that question cracked something open. I had spent 9 years asking what everyone else needed. My own answer surprised me with how specific it was. I needed a bank account in my name. I needed a lawyer. I needed my work back. I needed to raise my rates and stop apologizing for them. None of those things required my husband's permission. And the fact that I'd been waiting, unconsciously, for permission I was never going to get was something I had to sit with for a long time. Donna once said, in that calm way she had of saying devastating things, "The law does not reward suffering, it rewards documentation." I think about that often. Not just about divorce, but about life. The world does not hand you what you deserve simply because you endured. You have to show up for yourself with the same energy you've been spending on everyone else. You have to document your own worth. Not for a court, but for yourself, in the daily act of taking it seriously. Vivian at the kitchen counter cutting bell peppers while her life fell apart around her is someone I understand completely. She kept cutting because she didn't know what else to do, and because some part of her was not ready to stop being the woman who kept things together. I don't judge her. I was her. But I also know that the moment she saved that attorney's website under recipes was the moment she started becoming someone new. Not someone harder, not someone cold. Just someone who finally decided that her own life was worth protecting with the same devotion she'd given to everyone else's. That's not a radical idea. It just feels like one when you've forgotten it for long enough.